I speak from the heart. It's my opinion. If you don't like it, you can tell me. Time, okay? And it was embarrassing.
The Madrid crowd didn't just cheer, they erupted. And even a legend like Boris Becker couldn't hide his shock. Not because of a backhand winner, not because of a net cord, because Eala stepped on court, grabbed the mic, and speaks fluent Spanish like she was born in the heart of Andalusia. Flawless, natural, zero hesitation. The crowd lost it completely.
Hi everyone, I'm so excited to be back. Can't wait to be out on court and I hope to see you there.
Becker, a man who has witnessed every shade of greatness this sport has produced, went visibly quiet. That silence said more than any commentary ever could. This wasn't a scripted tournament moment. This wasn't a PR stunt. Eala had trained for years at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain, absorbing the language, the culture, the soul of Spanish tennis. The world knew she was good. Nobody knew she had gone this deep into it until Madrid, until that exact second. The tennis world just watched a Filipino-born professional walk into one of the most prestigious clay courts on earth and own the room in a language that wasn't hers, and make it look completely effortless.
Of course, we have to mention Eala, the incredible fandom coming, across the globe, especially from the Filipino community.
If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now, because this channel covers the moments mainstream tennis media glosses over. This story is just getting started. The Rafa Nadal Academy sits in Manacor, a small town on the eastern interior. It is not Madrid, it is not Barcelona, it is not the kind of place that makes international headlines every other week. But it is the place that quietly built Eala into something the tennis world wasn't fully prepared for. She arrived there as a young girl from the Philippines, talented, ambitious, and completely surrounded by a Spanish-speaking environment from day one. There was no English safety net, no Filipino community to retreat into after practice. Just the court, the coaches, the clay, and a language she had to absorb fast or fall behind. Most international players who train in Spain pick up conversational Spanish. Enough to order food, enough to thank a ball kid, enough to get by.
18-year-old lefty Eala from the Philippines could be the next big thing in pro tennis.
Eala didn't stop there. She stayed, she trained. She competed in junior tournaments across Spain and Europe, where Spanish was the dominant language in every locker room, every pre-match briefing, every post-match debrief. The language stopped being foreign to her brain long before she turned professional. It became the language she thought in on a tennis court. That distinction matters more than people realize. Language acquisition researchers have a term for this threshold, the point where a second language stops being translated in the mind and starts being processed directly. Eala crossed that threshold years ago, so when she stood on that Madrid court and opened her mouth, there was no internal translation happening. No searching for words, no mental rehearsal before speaking. What the crowd heard was a player who had fully internalized Spanish, not as a skill she practiced, but as a part of who she had become through years of genuine immersion. The Madrid crowd felt that difference immediately. Spanish audiences are sophisticated. They have watched countless international players attempt courtside Spanish over the years. They know the difference between rehearsed appreciation and authentic fluency. They know it within the first sentence. Eala's first sentence gave it away completely, but in the best possible direction. The eruption from the stands wasn't politeness. It wasn't the polite applause a crowd gives when a foreign player attempts a few words in their language. It was recognition. It was the sound of an entire arena realizing that this young woman was genuinely one of them, in a way that transcended nationality and passport and flag. Boris Becker has been part of tennis broadcasting long enough to have developed an almost clinical detachment from surprise. He covered the Federer era. He watched Djokovic dismantle records one by one. He commentated through the emergence of multiple generational talents across 2 decades of professional tennis. His job requires him to contextualize the extraordinary and make it accessible to viewers who might be seeing a player for the first time. Becker is not a man who loses his composure easily on a broadcast, which is exactly why his reaction to Eala's Spanish carried so much weight. The shock wasn't about the tennis. Becker has watched Eala play, he understands her game, he knows her ranking trajectory, her court coverage, her ability to construct points on clay with a maturity that belies her age. What he wasn't prepared for, what nobody in the broadcast world had fully flagged before that Madrid moment, was the cultural dimension of what Eala had built during her years in Spain. Tennis development coverage focuses on backhands and serve percentages and movement patterns. Nobody was running segments on how deeply a Filipino player had embedded herself into Spanish culture at one of the sport's most respected academies. That oversight made the Madrid moment hit harder than it might have otherwise. If Eala's Spanish fluency had been a widely discussed talking point going into the tournament, the crowd reaction would still have been warm. But Becker's visible quiet might not have landed with the same force. Instead, it arrived without warning. One moment, Eala was finishing a match on a clay court in Spain. The next, she was conducting a post-match conversation in the crowd's own language with a naturalness that made the moment feel less like a sports event and more like something that belonged in a film. The Rafa Nadal Academy's approach to player development has always extended beyond technical training. Nadal himself has spoken publicly about the importance of building character alongside skill, of creating an environment where young players learn discipline, respect, and cultural awareness as foundational elements of their professional development, not afterthoughts. The academy structure places young athletes inside a full educational and cultural framework. Players don't just train there, they live there, they study there, they grow up there. For a player like Eala, who arrived from the Philippines at a formative age, that environment became the primary lens through which she experienced adolescence. Her Spanish fluency is therefore not a party trick. It is not a charming bonus feature that sits alongside her tennis. It is the direct product of a developmental philosophy that treats the whole person, not just the athlete, as the subject of growth. The Madrid crowd erupting the way it did was, in a very real sense, the Rafa Nadal Academy philosophy bearing fruit in public for the first time at that kind of scale. Eala was the product. Madrid was the proof of concept. None of this diminishes her tennis. In fact, understanding the cultural immersion she underwent makes her on-court development more impressive, not less. She wasn't just hitting forehands for years in Mallorca. She was navigating an entirely new cultural identity while simultaneously building a professional tennis game capable of competing at the highest level of the WTA Tour. That kind of dual development requires an emotional intelligence and an adaptability that most players never have to develop because they train in their home countries surrounded by familiar language and culture. Eala had none of those comforts. She chose discomfort, she chose immersion. And Madrid was the moment the tennis world got to see what that choice had produced. Not on a scoreboard, but in real time, standing on court, speaking directly to a crowd in their own language with full fluency and zero self-consciousness. The WTA Tour has seen international players win hearts in various markets over the years. Li Na became a phenomenon in China and beyond. Garbine Muguruza carried the weight of both Spanish and Venezuelan expectations throughout her career. Sloane Stephens built a loyal following through her personality and accessibility. But the specific combination that Eala represents, a Filipino player who speaks fluent Spanish with genuine cultural roots in Spain, is genuinely unprecedented in the sport's recent history. There is no direct comparison, no template, no previous player who occupied exactly this intersection of identities. That novelty is part of what made the Madrid moment so electric. The crowd wasn't just responding to the Spanish, they were responding to the story behind the Spanish. They were responding to the realization that this player had given years of her life to their country's tennis culture, had trained on their clay, learned their language, absorbed their way of approaching the sport, and had then walked out onto one of their most iconic tournament courts and honored that connection publicly and spontaneously. Spontaneity is the key word. Scripted multilingual moments happen at tennis tournaments fairly regularly. Tournament directors encourage players to address local crowds in the local language. Players rehearse a sentence or two, it gets a warm response, and everyone moves on. What happened in Madrid with Eala was categorically different because it was not rehearsed. There was no media handler backstage coaching her on what to say. There was no script. There was just a player who had earned her Spanish through years of daily immersion, expressing herself naturally in the environment where she had grown up as an athlete. Becker's background actually gives his reaction additional context worth examining. He is German. He built his entire professional career competing in environments where English was the dominant language of tennis culture, despite it not being his mother tongue. He navigated press conferences, broadcast interviews, and player communications in a second language for most of his career. He knows what it looks like when someone is genuinely fluent versus when someone is performing fluency. He has lived that distinction personally. So when he went quiet watching Eala speak Spanish on that Madrid court, it wasn't the reaction of someone who didn't understand what they were seeing. It was the reaction of someone who understood it completely and was struck by how rare it genuinely is. The Philippines has been watching Eala's career with a specific kind of pride that goes beyond normal national sporting support. She is not just a successful athlete from their country. She is a young woman who left home at a formative age, built herself from the ground up in a foreign environment, and has returned to the global stage carrying both her Filipino identity and her Spanish-shaped development simultaneously. For Filipino tennis fans, the Madrid moment wasn't just about Spanish fluency, it was about seeing one of their own command an international stage with complete authority and comfort, in a language that had nothing to do with where she was born. That dual pride, Filipino heart, Spanish fluency, global stage, is the full picture of what erupted in Madrid. The crowd reacted to the Spanish, the Filipino community reacted to the courage, the tennis world reacted to the combination of both. And Becker's shock was the broadcast world finally catching up to something that had been building quietly in Manacor for years. Something that the rankings and the match statistics had never quite captured until that specific moment on that specific court. What comes next for Eala matters enormously. She is at the stage of her career where the trajectory is genuinely open. The clay court experience she built in Spain gives her a foundation that most players her age simply don't have. Her game has the technical depth that comes from years of training under one of the world's most sophisticated development programs. And now, after Madrid, she has something additional. She has a story, a genuine, unrepeatable, culturally rich story that connects her to one of the sport's most passionate audiences in a way that will follow her career for as long as she competes on European clay. Boris Becker's shock was real. The Madrid crowd's eruption was real. Eala's fluent Spanish was real. But the thing that made all three of those elements land simultaneously with such force was the years of quiet, unglamorous, daily work that preceded that moment. Nobody films the Tuesday afternoon practice sessions in Manacor. Nobody broadcasts the casual Spanish conversations in the academy canteen. Nobody documents the slow accumulation of cultural fluency that happens when a young athlete from the Philippines decides to fully commit to a life in Spain. The cameras only show up for the matches and the post-match interviews. Madrid was the moment the cameras finally caught something they had been missing for years. The tennis world has a tendency to reduce players to their statistics, ranking points, serve speeds, breakpoint conversion rates. Eala has good numbers across all of those categories, but Madrid reminded everyone watching that the most compelling thing about a tennis player is never the numbers. It is the human being behind the racket. It is the choices they made before anyone was watching. It is the language they learned when they didn't have to. It is the culture they absorbed when they could have stayed comfortable and stayed surface level. Eala went deep. Madrid is what going deep looks like when it finally surfaces. This channel exists because moments like this one deserve more than a 30-second highlight clip and a generic caption. They deserve context. They deserve the full story. They deserve someone willing to ask why Boris Becker went quiet, why a Madrid crowd erupted for a Filipino player, and why fluent Spanish on a tennis court became the most talked about moment of that tournament. If this kind of deep dive tennis storytelling is what you came here for, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. Because the next story we're covering is just as compelling as this one and you do not want to miss it.